But I think in the last year, I was just in this period of intense stress that it manifested, right? It attacked my eye. And I learned a very valuable lesson in kind of the things that we do, the things that I do to manage my health. They keep me very stable. They keep me feeling very well, but that autoimmunity is under the surface.
Have you been diagnosed with MS and you're looking outside your typical medical system for more answers? You're definitely not alone. Hi, I'm Adrienne. I'm a nutritionist and a certified MS integrative nutritional health coach, and I've helped and interviewed so many people who have reversed this disease holistically, and so can you. If you're serious about getting back to health and learning all the steps to do so, join my community. I've got a free version and a version that's very affordable. I've got coaching sessions. I've got 2 courses, a mini course and a 12-week course. I've got special guests that have deep smarts and healing that come on once a month. And I've got lots of resources. So if you'd like to scale your healing and get back to the healthy person you once were, come join me. And when you first join, it's free. And then you can decide later if you want to upgrade. So just go to my webpage, nourishyourway.com, and hit join the community button. It's that simple. So let's dive into the topic today. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. I want to introduce somebody special who I have with me today. Her name is Mickey Trescott, and she has her master's in science and nutrition and functional medicine. And she is an author, and we're going to talk about this later, but she's got 4 cookbooks that she has written, and she is about to launch her 4th one. So, Mickey, thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I want to tell this quick story. You and I have come around full circle because I learned about you early on, I want to say like 7 years ago. And I learned about you because my daughter-in-law, she got her degree in dietetics, and she knew that I had healed most of my symptoms with MS. But for my birthday or Christmas, I don't remember which one, she was working at Natural Grocers, and she found this book called The Nutrient Dense Kitchen, and it was written by Mickey. And I looked through it and I read Mickey's story. It's in here. And by the way, Mickey was diagnosed with celiac disease and also Hashimoto's. But there's something else that she had some issues with too. And I'll have her talk about that. But anyway, that's how I got to know her. And then Mickey reached out to me recently and said, hey, I'm putting a cookbook out. Maybe I can be on your podcast. And I said, oh my God, this would be great because I already know who you are. So anyway, Mickey, I want to start by telling everybody your story, right? Because even though you weren't diagnosed with MS, and before I hit the record button, you thought you might have MS, but you had at least 2 different autoimmune diseases. And autoimmune diseases overlap. I mean, we have a lot of the same symptoms, right? So I'll just have you take the reins. So what happened to you?
Yeah, so this all really started for me 15 years ago when I was undergoing my own health crisis, which at the time was a couple years. I know for a lot of people, they suffer with autoimmune symptoms for even far longer than that. I think the average is 5 or 6 years before a diagnosis. So I ended up having, I was in my 20s. I was really active. I had really not had any health problems until that point. And then I start getting this like numbness and tingling in my fingertips. I start being just really tired, just out of the blue, sleeping all the time, being anxious, not being able to get through my shifts at work. I worked at a coffee shop. I was on my feet. I was having like muscle fatigue and my feet would hurt. And I was just kind of like, is this what it's like to get older? Right. And again, I'm 26, so I'm just like, I guess this is what it's like. So I start going to the doctor, and, at the time I looked and appeared to be a healthy 26-year-old, even though, half of my hair had fallen out and I was freezing constantly. And I went to the doctor and they were like, "Oh, no, you don't have any thyroid problem. Like your blood tests all checks out. Like, maybe it's depression. Maybe you should get some mental health support." And I kept being like, I'm pretty sure that something's wrong. And I was just continually dismissed. At the time, I didn't have insurance, so I didn't really have a lot of resources to work with. I would, pay out of pocket, go to the doctor, have them tell me like everything's great. I didn't really have tools to advocate for myself. That kind of took many months of continuing to ask for answers and then building up that courage and saving up some money and going back again. So ultimately, I really declined the neurological, that numbness and tingling kind of progressed to half of my face. I started slurring my speech. I was kind of off balance. I had nerve pain in my feet, kind of traveled up to my knees, and just felt like one of my feet was just like in a fire constantly. So I eventually went to a neurologist. I had an MRI. I had some white matter lesions. That's where, possible MS came up. I also had some connective tissue symptoms, so that full body pain. I had pleurisy, which is inflammation of the lining of the lungs. Felt like I was getting stabbed with like tiny knives every time I took a breath.
Oh, wow.
So rheumatology, they were kind of like, well, maybe lupus. They have some diseases that I could have been categorized, but I didn't really have all the markers. So both specialties kind of said, you need to have these symptoms for maybe 6 more months. We need to monitor you, and then maybe we can get you a diagnosis and a treatment. And I was just like, 6 months? Like, I can't live like this, And through that, I found out that I did have celiac disease, which can cause lesions in the brain. I did find out that I have Hashimoto's, which explained, the hair loss and the fatigue, the coldness. But I was told really that the only treatment for me was a gluten-free diet, and my thyroid hormones were normal, so they wouldn't give me any thyroid medication, and to kind of go on my way. Meanwhile, at this point, I'm like bedridden. I'm not working. I am just not barely existing. And I just did not want to take that wait and see approach. So I started researching nutrition. That's how I discovered AIP. It was kind of at the very beginnings of the autoimmune protocol community, where a bunch of different women that I connected with that were blogging about their autoimmune symptoms in all different conditions. So one of my friends had MS, one of them had IBD, another had Hashimoto's. We all connected, created like a little private Facebook group for the 6 of us, and we just kind of experimented on ourselves. And all of us saw a lot of improvements. Like, actually, my friend Whitney, who has MS, went in for a follow-up MRI, and she saw that her lesions had improved. And I remember being like, I didn't know that that was possible, but we were all feeling better. And so out of that is kind of what grew the autoimmune protocol community, because we were then blogging and writing, and eventually kind of led me on the path to write multiple books and become a health coach and support other people through this.
Wow. Okay, I've got some questions for you, girl.
Yeah.
Okay, so you and I had similar symptoms. I mean, I remember my fatigue. I like how you wrote crushing fatigue, because that's how it felt for me too. Severe pain. You also wrote you had insomnia, anxiety. You said you had slurred speech at one point. And at one point I did too. And you had joint pain, dizziness. I had dizziness as well at one point. So it's very interesting how all these autoimmune conditions connect in some way. What I wanted to ask you is, how did you find this Facebook autoimmune community? Is this when you figured out, okay, food might fix what I have going on?
So actually, this was in the time of blogs. I know it's hard to imagine right now. Everybody is so like on social media and in groups. But back then, really blogging was the only way that people were putting out this information of sharing a personal healing journey. So this is how I connected with other women who ultimately, like, I commented on their blogs and they commented on my blog, and we were like, hey, you're doing a similar thing. We became friends. We created this private group on Facebook for 6 of us. Like this was not a public thing, right? And
Wow.
eventually, from there, I found other Facebook groups. There's actually a Hashimoto's group called Hashimoto's 411. At the time that I joined it, there were maybe 200 people in that group. I think today there's about 100,000. So back then it was kind of before, the support groups and, even Facebook was kind of like a very small community. But I was just doing this with my friends, right? This is like our group chat. And kind of out of that, some of those people, one of them was Sarah Ballantyne, which people might be familiar with. She has a PhD in medical biophysics. These are people who ultimately became influential members of the AIP community because we kind of had backgrounds where, like, I had a background before I got sick as a chef. So we kind of used our prior learning and then also like gained some more knowledge. Like I went back to school to study nutrition to really nourish this community. And then out of that community, people started writing like, I have XYZ autoimmune condition. I'm seeing so much progress. So then I even started publishing stories from other people just because people would ask, well, you have Hashimoto's and celiac. Like what happens if you have rheumatoid arthritis or what happens if you have MS? So I've been publishing those over the last 10 years on the blog. And, there's almost 100 of them, which is really, really fun and a privilege to be able to do.
Cool. So I also want to mention that because you wrote in your book that you were a vegan, right?
Yes.
You were a vegan, and you wrote in your book that you even hated the smell of meat cooking. And then one day you decided, okay, I'm going to try meat. And then you said you looked in the mirror after eating meat and you saw your cheeks were a little bit more pink than usual.
Yeah.
And you felt different. So tell me about that.
Yeah. So I had been vegan since college. So it was like almost 10 years. And I was a really good cook. I knew how to cook vegetables. I was eating home cooked foods. A lot of people, when I got sick, they were like, "Oh, aren't you like the healthy person, right? Like you're the one eating all the vegetables. You're super healthy." And I think when I started researching the intersection of autoimmune disease and nutrition, what really came up for me were the nutrients in meat are actually there's a lot of overlap with what our body needs to recover from autoimmune disease. So I'm not saying that the only way to recover is eating meat. I do think that vegetarians can be successful, but I also think that my specific issues, so like all of that nerve damage really requires a lot of B vitamins. All of the connective tissue stuff really requires like collagen and gelatin, and all of the minerals and everything that are in meat is just like so nourishing to somebody that has celiac. Celiac, we end up with like very low iron, very low B12. So I started to see meat as medicinal for my condition. And then when I started eating it, I noticed like my body temperature on average with Hashimoto's was 93 degrees when I was super sick. When I started eating meat, my core body temperature went up. Like my cheeks got pink. Like I was so pale and green all the time. And so I just had this feeling like this is really something that is nourishing me and helping me. So I went towards that, but it was a really difficult transition. I'm not going to lie. Emotionally, I really didn't want to eat meat. I really had a lot of ethical concerns. So I really went out of my way to make sure that the meat that I was buying came from a good farm and all of that. But it really transformed my life, including animal protein in my diet again.
I think that's incredible. I love that story. And I don't know if you know who Dr. Terry Walls is.
Oh, yeah. Terry's a friend of mine. Yeah.
Okay.
I knew Terry back before she could raise her arms above her shoulders.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the next time I saw her, she was like, "Hey, Mickey," So
Oh my God.
yeah, Terry's a really big inspiration in my life. Her TED Talk is actually one of the things that got me started on my journey of learning more about nutrition and autoimmune disease. So
me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah.
That's the reason why I healed myself, because of food. That's incredible, because the reason I was bringing her up is because she was a vegetarian, which is not too far off from a vegan. Vegetarians can eat eggs and I think cheese.
Mm-hmm.
But she learned the same thing. And in her book, she said she had a hard time eating meat too, because That's not what she did for a long time. And so she healed herself out of a wheelchair. You healed yourself. I think that's really incredible. The other thing I want to ask you is your celiac disease, because I've heard and I've read that's really hard to diagnose. Do you remember getting tested for that? And what did they do?
It was so like in the middle of like, well, I had a lot going on, right? Like I was having lots of blood tests for the rheumatology. I was having the MRI because of the neurological problems. The celiac was just like they took, I had antibodies. So it was like a blood test. Both the celiac and the Hashimoto's were kind of like, oh, by the way, you have these two things. It was really like, it was really
Ah,
easy and quick, but also like, just eat gluten-free. Everything's going to go away. You're going to be fine. And it was
mm,
actually when they came back, it's tissue transglutaminase, it's the antibody. When that came back positive, I remember them being like, "Oh, this is the problem. Stop eating gluten. Everything's going to go away." So I go gluten-free, and it didn't do anything. And I
ah,
actually had no gut symptoms at the time, which made it so, I mean, intestinal manifestations of celiac disease. So this is when people like me get neurological problems and they don't have any stomach pain, they don't have any diarrhea. That was me. This can happen in up to 30% of people that have celiac. So that's why getting diagnosed with celiac can be so challenging for some people because it's completely missed.
wow. Yeah, that's interesting because I've got a friend who has celiac and she was always bloated, and she always has had stomach aches. So
Mhm.
then she was diagnosed, and that doesn't sound like you had any of that.
Mm-mm. No, and I had digestive issues. I would definitely say my digestion did not feel good, but
Okay.
with celiac, I think doctors are trained, there's diarrhea, there might be bleeding, there's like urgency, there's like pain. I didn't have any of that. So yeah, celiac. I mean, and I've heard lots of different things. Some people get, there's a skin manifestation of celiac that's like a very painful rash that a lot of people get on their shoulders. It just really, everybody's body is different in the way that they manifest, right?
Yeah. And then you had an issue with your eye as well.
Yes. So that is very recent. All of this transpired about 15 years ago. And I kind of, I found the autoimmune protocol. I did the elimination diet. It was a couple years of very deep healing, but I got back on my feet. I went back to school to study nutrition. I started writing books about this. I was living very well, feeling super healthy. And the last year, I've been writing my new book, The New Autoimmune Protocol. Writing books are really hard. I know you know how this is.
Oh, yeah.
You're just kind of constantly showing up every single day. You don't really
Yep.
have a boss or anyone like expecting anything of you, but you're just kind of like, I'm doing this because I love it and I want to get it done. So I was like right in that road. And I woke up one day with kind of a red spot on the inside of one of the white part of my eye. And I was kind of like, of course, it was a Sunday because health stuff always happens, when everybody's away for the weekend and you can't just like call your doctor and be like, hey, want to like float this by you, send you a
Yeah, of
picture or
course.
whatever. No, everyone's gone, so it happens on a Sunday. I'm like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to go in and have it checked out. So on Monday, I go to my optometrist and she's like, oh, this is like just a little irritation on your eye. I was doing photography, I was looking at the computer a lot. She's like, here's a week steroid, like it's going to be fine. So by the end of the week, I started having some vision changes. And then, of course, my doctor was out of town. So I saw a different doctor and they were like, oh, you just got to keep doing the drops for a few more days. Like, you're going to be fine. And I'm like, okay. So again, it's the next Sunday and I like can't see out of my eye. Like
Oh my
I
gosh.
have like, it's blurry. I'm seeing halos. So the next morning I call ophthalmology, which like optometry, this is your eyeglass doctor. Ophthalmology is actually a medical doctor who specializes in the eye. I call that clinic and they're like, do you have a driver? Get in the car. What you have can cause blindness. Like we need to see you within an hour. So I get over there and I find out that I'm like in a full blown uveitis flare, which is actually the iris. And they're like, it's autoimmune. Have you ever heard of that? And I'm like, yeah,
You're
yes,
laughing.
yes, absolutely have heard of it. They're like, sometimes it happens to people out of the blue, but then sometimes it's like a part of an underlying autoimmune thing. So long story short, led me on the road. It actually happened in one eye, then it happened in the other eye. And then since then, it actually hasn't happened. This was over a year ago, but it led me on another diagnosis trail, which has been really weird because otherwise I feel very well. But I wanted to, go through all the motions and kind of see what I'm dealing with. I found out that I have a genetic marker called HLA-B27, which is linked to a lot of connective tissue autoimmune conditions, can also manifest as that eye symptom, can also manifest as psoriasis and some tendon issues. And so I ultimately got diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis just a few months ago. And all of this is coming together. I really don't have a lot of symptoms, but I know that that potential is there. And I know that this is the autoimmune condition that 15 years ago, this is what put me in bed, right? This is like, I had that all over, muscle aches, joint pain, and fatigue. I had rashes. I had rash on my scalp, and that all kind of really went away when I did AIP. But I think in the last year, I was just in this period of intense stress that it manifested, right? It attacked my eye. And I learned a very valuable lesson in kind of the things that we do, the things that I do to manage my health. They keep me very stable. They keep me feeling very well, but that autoimmunity is under the surface, right? And so really the thing that I have learned is really even just like 15 years later, I'm still doing this. It's still so powerful and so meaningful, but life can change, right? I'm going through perimenopause now. My hormones are changing. My life looks a lot different now. And I'm putting myself under a lot of stress with writing these books and trying to get the word out about what I know so that I can help other people. But sometimes I have to be very careful about not overdoing it so that I don't cause my autoimmune stuff to flare up,
I'm so glad you mentioned that because I talk about stress on this podcast a lot, and stress is a big deal. So thank God you healed that up. So what did you do to help heal that?
When my eye was flared up, I will be honest, the consequence is permanent vision loss. And so I was not messing around. I did exactly what the ophthalmologist wanted me to do, which was a very high dose steroid every single hour. I had to keep my eye permanently dilated, which for anybody that, you've had those paralyzing drops, I had to put them in 3 times a day. So one of my eyes was just like super blown out. But that took care of it in about 10 days. Then I had to do a big taper. Then it actually started in my other eye, but that eye, I got it taken care of in like a few days because I just started the treatment really early. It's kind of like getting a big painful rash, but it's happening in your eye. So if you get something on it topically, it kind of goes away. And then I brought in all of like the food, the stress management, took some time off of work, and since then have been very mindful of my stress levels. And I've been very grateful that it kind of hasn't come back. But it is important to know, when we live in autoimmune bodies, even when we have experienced so much progress with our healing, that the potential, if the perfect storm of different things comes up where, I see it now looking back. I wasn't eating my usual because I was doing all this recipe development. I was recipe testing like desserts and things that I don't usually eat. I was not eating kind of my regular food that makes me feel great. I was just working really long hours. I was using my eyes, on a computer, looking at the camera, that kind of thing. So now I see it and, I know better, and happy to talk about it in case it inspires other people. Also not to feel bad if you have a flare, because they happen sometimes,
Yeah, no, I'm glad you talked about that and practicing, less stress kind of practices, right? Taking work off, taking the day off, going outside, going for a walk, getting away from the computer. That's really important. Okay, well, I want to talk about your books now. Okay, so you've got 4 cookbooks. Your 4th one is coming out. So tell me a little bit about all the books and how this new one is different from your others.
Awesome. So the first book that I wrote is called the Autoimmune Paleo Cookbook. It was the very first cookbook dedicated to AIP, which is the autoimmune protocol. The autoimmune protocol is an elimination diet that I originally used way back in the day. There's a few phases. You do transition, you eliminate foods for 30 to 90 days, and then you reintroduce foods. We can talk about the specifics later if you think your audience is interested. But that's really the book that kind of started the AIP movement and kind of my first cookbook. The second book that I wrote was with a partner named Angie Alt, and it's called the Autoimmune Wellness Handbook. And the goal with that book was to be still an AIP book. It has a section with recipes, but the food part is just in the context of kind of what an autoimmune patient would do on their healing journey. So how to advocate for yourself, how to, work within, conventional medicine, natural medicine, integrating all of the things that you decide to use for your maintenance, for your autoimmune disease, the food piece, why diet is important, but then also the lifestyle pieces like stress management, sleep, movement, connection with other people, connection with nature. And so we kind of brought together all this research to show that, for somebody newly diagnosed, kind of where do they start? There's some recipes, meal plans, and there's even a lifestyle plan where if you want to start like working on your sleep, you want to start managing your stress, there's a fun plan in that book also. And then the third book is The Nutrient Dense Kitchen, which is the one that your daughter-in-law got at Natural Grocers.
Yes.
The Nutrient Dense Kitchen is also an AIP book, but I really wanted to lead with nutrient density because over the years, so this book came out in 2019, about 5 or 6 years after my first book came out. And really the piece that people miss is that the autoimmune protocol isn't just about the foods you eliminate, it's about what you add in. And my healing journey really taught me that it was the foods that I have included, not the foods that I excluded, that really make the impact long-term. So things like the anti-inflammatory omega-3, cold water fatty fish, bone broth, lots of colorful fruits and vegetables for fiber and phytonutrients, fermented foods. So in that book, it's still an AIP book. It is still a cookbook, but it has all this educational content about like where you would find different nutrients in food and then recipes for people who maybe don't know how to cook with these ingredients for anyone who's interested in nutrient density. And then my newest book coming out now is called The New Autoimmune Protocol. And I call it The New Autoimmune Protocol because over the last 15 years, we now have medical research using AIP for different autoimmune conditions. So in the beginning, it was like self-experimentation, it was theory. In 2015, AIP began to be studied at research institutions like Scripps. They did 4 studies using AIP for IBD, which includes Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. They found that 73% of patients reached clinical remission in 6 weeks using the elimination diet, which is just incredible. They did a RNA study. So this is a gene expression study showing all of the tissue level. So like in the intestine, they had samples before and after. They showed that the tissue level changes for anti-inflammation and tissue repair were just before and after, just doing exactly what we would think it does, when people feel better. Mm-hmm. And then there have been 2 studies in Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which I have. So I was really excited to see this research showing that the autoimmune protocol helps symptom improvement. It lowers inflammation with CRP. There are some interesting reductions in thyroid volume. So when you have Hashimoto, sometimes your thyroid gets swollen and inflamed. And they also, the second study, that group saw a positive trend in the anthropometrics, which is weight, body composition. They saw 8-pound weight loss, 10% relative fat loss, and most of that came from fat and not protein. And this is eating a diet that is the exact same amount of calories. So people with Hashimoto's, we don't have a benchmark like clinical remission, because when the hormones are balanced, this is the only treatment for Hashimoto's, is to keep those hormones in the stable level. 60% of patients have symptoms that interfere with their daily life, even though their hormones are normal. So these studies were actually looking at symptom management and symptom improvement, which, like unexplained weight gain, is a primary symptom for a lot of people of Hashimoto's. So that was seen across the board, really good symptom management. And then lastly, research has also been done in psoriasis, has yet to be published, and then a couple studies in rheumatoid arthritis, one of which was just published a couple weeks ago, showing 77% clinical improvement, I think 30% clinical remission in that study. So all this to say, we know so much more about the autoimmune protocol from humans and researchers doing trials in using real people with autoimmune disease. So AIP needed an update, right? We learned so much, excuse me, that that now we have two frameworks for elimination. The original protocol I'm calling core AIP, and then the new protocol I'm calling modified AIP. So everybody has this option. They can do that original protocol, the one I did 15 years ago, or you can actually start with the modified version, which has some additional foods allowed that just make it easier and more accessible. And it's based on evidence that people maybe don't need to do that super restricted diet because it's too stressful and too hard for some people. And that stress management, like we've been talking about so far, is so impactful that I actually think people are getting better results with that modified.
I'm so glad you said that because, I mean, you and I are basically on the same diet. I mean, I follow the Walls protocol, which is basically a paleo-based diet. And, you know, I don't think you have any grains at all in your.
Yeah, and so one difference between, you know, AIP started within the paleo community, and when I did it, I stopped at paleo when I reintroduced foods. I would say today, not everybody wants to stop at paleo, and some patients actually do fine when they introduce grains and legumes. So with modified, that is included in the protocol. So if you're somebody who's like, I want to do paleo, I want to do something very close to Walls. I've actually worked with many MS clients who they love Terry's work and her research, and they want to do AIP in the context of, you know, the high vegetable requirements and kind of some of her very specific MS like interventions. We absolutely can do that. But what I love about the modern AIP is everybody gets to choose kind of what works for them, right? If you're vegetarian, you can't do core AIP. You can't do that original protocol. So what I love about the modern approach to AIP is that people can choose between that original protocol, the core protocol, or they can choose this modified protocol that, like, if you're a vegetarian, beans and rice are going to make it so that you actually have enough protein sources to do it safely. Now, I would rather people be eating meat because I know that the nutrition there is so much stronger, but there are a lot of reasons that people are vegetarian. Also, some people can't afford to go completely grain-free. I mean, rice is a very affordable nutrient and can kind of stretch meals. So I love that this is flexible and adaptable, for each person can decide the things that are important to them. If you really believe that paleo is the way that you want to eat, or maybe you're already eating paleo, but you're still eating some of those food triggers that are known to be problematic for autoimmune patients, like nightshades or eggs, you might be able to just easily step to core AIP because you've already done that work to go to paleo. And then in the flip side, you might find that on the reintroduction side, when you feel really good, you know, you might want to reintroduce rice. It might not be like an everyday thing in your diet, but then if you travel, if you go on a trip, right, it's going to make it so much easier to eat when you have that reintroduction in. So it's all about personalizing. Everybody's different. Everybody has different values. Everybody has different requirements in their nutrient density, but it can be, you know, I love that AIP has kind of moved outside paleo because it expanded to include options for people that, you know, might think outside of that framework, you know?
Yeah, no, I love that because we're all bio individuals. And one person, like my daughter-in-law, she's allergic to avocados. She can't eat avocados. You know, I love the fact that when Terry Walls had her protocol, she allowed rice and gluten-free grains. And, when you're on the American Standard Diet to begin with, and you got to do a 180 on your diet, eating some rice and some, gluten-free grains is a lot easier than taking it all out. So, and I healed, eating rice and quinoa and some other, almond flour. I bake, right? So I love baking. So I use almond flour and coconut flour and all these other, it's a nut, right? It's not a grain, but I had to learn about all these new ingredients to, satisfy my taste buds, but also, be good to my body. So I love that. I can't wait till that comes out. So you do have sounds like you've got some rice recipes and some other kind of gluten-free, I'm guessing, and legumes too in your new book.
Yeah, so the way the book is structured, half of it is the program guide for the autoimmune protocol, updated with all the medical research. So you have full guidance for the transition phase, which is kind of the first phase, the elimination phase, which is what everybody knows AIP to be. That's where you remove the different lists of foods based on if you're doing core AIP or modified AIP. Then there's the reintroduction phase, and you reintroduce foods in order of least likely to be a problem and most nutrient dense. So there's 4 stages. And then you move on to the foods that are most likely to cause a problem and least nutrient dense. So really, when you start reintroducing foods, you're reintroducing things first that are probably going to be okay. They're going to expand your diet so that you get some wins. And then at the end, you've got like some of those nightshades, I don't recommend most people introduce gluten, but if you decide to do that, I recommend you do that very last, so that you really don't start with that because you're going to kind of backtrack a lot, right?
Yeah.
So that first half of the book is really the program guide. And then the second half of the book is a cookbook, and it's divided into 2 parts. One part is core AIP recipes, and the other part is modified AIP recipes. I've also got meal plans in there. And for people who are like, well, I'm core AIP, why do I want a cookbook with all these modified recipes? Guess what? When you reintroduce foods, those modified AIP extra foods are the first reintroductions on core AIP. So, I don't recommend doing the elimination phase forever. You're going to get to reintroductions, and hopefully a lot of those recipes are then going to be recipes you can use in your rotation. If you're going to just do modified AIP, all of the recipes are compliant for modified, right? Because core is a little bit stricter. So depending on whatever way you're going to do, I am hoping that people can use the book to really learn about AIP and then implement it either using the meal plans that I provided or making your own meal plans with some of the ingredients and the recipes in the book. But yeah, I worked really hard on that.
I'm sure. Okay, so Mickey, your new book, The New Autoimmune Protocol, where can people find it and when does it come out?
Yeah, so it comes out on May 26th. You can buy it anywhere books are sold. It's available internationally as a Kindle version. And then the actual physical book is also available in some international locations. So I believe like Australia, Canada, UK, you should be able to get your hands on a physical copy. If not, the Kindle should be available if you're somewhere, outside that in the world.
Yay. Well, thank you for coming on. This has been a great conversation. And I want to ask you one last question. So if somebody came to you, Mickey, with, suffering from an autoimmune disease, tell me, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is don't panic. I remember when I first learned the word autoimmune, what it meant at 26 years old, because I had never heard it before, despite the fact that my grandfather was a rheumatologist. I didn't know what autoimmune meant. I know it's a big, scary word, but really don't be scared by it. It's just a part of you. It's a little part of how your body is behaving. It's more like an observation, right? But it is not you. It is not going to dictate your whole future. So that would be my advice, is just not to be scared by a diagnosis. The way that you feel right now is not permanent. I know, remember when I felt so sick, I was like, I'm never going to forget how this feels. And then now I'm like, I actually can't remember. So that's what I hope for everyone, is that they can find baby steps, if it's just one tiny little thing, maybe going to bed, earlier, or, making one ingredient swap in your kitchen. Those baby steps really add up, and it's really only hard until you get used to it and it becomes your routine of taking care of yourself. So, that's what I have to say.
Mickey. Thank you so much. This has been
thank you.
Yeah, this is going to help a lot of people on my podcast. So thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
If you liked the episode, please share it and rate the podcast, and then also join my newsletter. And it's easy to get on my list. Just go to my website, nourishyourway.com, go to the newsletter tab, and sign up. And then I'll give you healing information once a week, so you won't miss anything. And I also include a recipe of the week. Thanks for joining me today, and you'll hear from me in the near future.